What we saw in Barcelona were the two faces of Max Verstappen. On the one hand, a totally brilliant drive in a Red Bull Honda that was nothing like as quick as a McLaren-Mercedes over the Grand Prix distance of the Spanish Grand Prix, or ever individual lap. Actually, Sector 2 was never, ever going to be any good for Red Bull in Barcelona. But on the other side of the coin, towards the end of the race, after a safety car deployment, race restart with 6 laps to go, Max went absolutely ballistic and ended up with a 10-second penalty, which dropped him down to P10. It's not that Max would care at that point, because already he'd dropped from third, a very, very good third behind the two McLarens, down to P5. So in order to work out exactly what happened between those two Maxes, we need to look at the various stages of the race. The race began with McLaren-Mercedes accentuating their advantage by starting on new soft tyres. Max Verstappen, like most of the others on the grid, was on a used set of softs, so there was no way in the world, really, that either McLaren driver should have been beaten by anybody into turn one, and that definitely proved to be the case for Oscar Piastri from the pole. Absolutely superb, even though there was a very, very short time at this race between the reds coming on and then going out. Oscar Piastri, as I say, absolutely brilliant from the pole. But behind him, 3 abreast, Max Verstappen, who'd made a very good start, was on the left, on the outside. In other words, Lando Norris in the middle, hadn't made a great start. And George Russell to his right, not right up with those two, but nonetheless making it 3 abreast going into turn one. And of course, it was Max Verstappen that did the most beautiful pass around the outside and got up into second place. It took Lando Norris 4 or 5, 6 laps eventually to get past Max, which he was going to do because the tyres went off quickly on the Red Bull. It then looked like everyone would fall into the pattern of starting on the soft tyres, going to the medium, and then maybe having another medium or maybe a soft tyre towards the end of the race. But Red Bull made a good call at this point and put Max onto his one and only set of new soft tyres. And as a result of that, and some brilliant driving, some fabulous passing around the outside, people like Antonelli around the outside of turn 12, really impressive to watch. Max found himself in a very, very solid P3, putting pressure on the McLarens as the race started to unfold, 2/3 distance, well clear of Charles Leclerc, who was never really a threat in the Ferrari, who got the advantage over Lewis Hamilton early on. We'll get onto that a little bit further into the video. So Max is in a very clear P3. They're all on used softs at this time. Max has had to make his final stop as well. And for a while, he's catching Lando Norris, but then it settles down, and it is clear he's going to finish third, probably 3 or 4 seconds behind Lando. But then, with 6 laps to go, effectively by the time they restarted, Kimi Antonelli pulled to a halt at turn 10, or drove off the track at turn 10, smoke pouring out the back of his Mercedes, low oil pressure, and parked the car there. This put out the safety car, deployed the safety car for about 4 laps. And at this point, with Max in P3, and he's on the soft tyre, and potentially there's only going to be 6, 7 laps to go, you would think that Red Bull would then say, wow, we've earned this position, we'll keep him out there and keep track position. We'll stay out. An obvious call, particularly as they saw both Piastri and Lando Norris coming into the pits for used soft tyres. They didn't have any new sets left. But unbelievably, impossibly the worst call ever made in the history of Formula One strategy, they brought Max Verstappen in as well, and they put him on a set of new hard tyres with only 6 laps of the race to go. It was unbelievable. It's incomprehensible, really. Bearing in mind the obvious thing was to leave him out in the first place, and at worst he was going to finish third. But if you're going to change tyres, put him onto another set of soft used like everybody else. Why put him onto hard tyres? Max, as he's accelerating out of the pit lane, got onto the radio straight away and said, what tyres are these? And you could hear the sort of panic in his voice, and they said, oh, it's hard tyres, Max. And he said, well, why am I on hard tyres? And they said there was no option, which, well, either Pirelli have got it wrong or Red Bull have got it wrong, because Pirelli made it very clear going into the start of this Grand Prix that Max Verstappen had 3 sets of used soft tyres still to use in the race. Now, I suppose it could be that that third set, because he'd run 2 used sets already, I suppose it could be that that third set was very worn and had no grip in it, or was faulty or something like that. But I think Pirelli would change a tyre if things weren't right. Pirelli wouldn't put out a statement saying that Max had 3 used sets of tyres, soft tyres, unless it was accurate. And that set of soft tyres was kept in the garage, and they shouldn't have brought him in anyway. As a result, he's on hard tyres. You can see Max, he's a sitting duck. He's got Charles Leclerc behind him, who's on a used set of softs. And then behind him, George Russell in the Mercedes, also on a used set of softs. And there's Max Verstappen on the hard tyre. And he's doing like this behind the safety car, doing all he can to get temperature into the tyres. And eventually the safety car pulls in. The first real corner is the last corner, turn 14. Max guns it, and the back end at the exit of 14 does that on the Red Bull. And it's the most unbelievable save, the most amazing car control and reflexes you're ever going to see at high speed on a high-speed corner. Just brilliant recovery by Max. But of course, it lost him time. And Charles Leclerc was alongside him as they went past the start-finish line, and then moved over on him at about 330 kilometers an hour before the braking area into turn 1 and hit the Red Bull. Max stays absolutely straight, and you can see clearly from the overhead shot that Charles just drives into him. One of the most dangerous things I've seen since Lance Stroll did that to Fernando Alonso in Austin a few years back. Anything on the straight should be jumped upon immediately. I've got a massive amount of respect for Charles Leclerc, and I'm not sure he did this deliberately, but he hit Max Verstappen at 330 kilometers an hour. It was inexcusable, just terrible. Anyways, they're going into turn 1. Max is sort of a bit shell-shocked by what's happened there, and George Russell's now inside him, and Max tries to sort of squeeze him out and doesn't succeed and takes the escape road out of turn 1, avoiding turn 2, and rejoins in front of George Russell. In his mind, George was never in front, and he should keep position. Of course, this is where the sporting regulations came into play, and obviously at this point there was a lot of discussion on the Red Bull pit wall. And it wasn't good, because they came to their own decision that they should tell Max to give the position back to George. Meanwhile, the FIA stewards were looking at exactly that situation and deciding they wouldn't take any further action. So there was no need even to tell Max to give the position back to George. That compounds, obviously, everything that went wrong thereafter. So you can imagine now he's on the hard tyre when he's driven one of the best races of his career to be where he is in P3 behind the two McLarens. Red Bull made a massive strategy mistake. Charles Leclerc's he's had the massive moment out of turn 14. Charles Leclerc's almost caused a massive accident on the straight. And now George Russell has got past, and he's got to give the position back to George Russell, his arch rival. So you can imagine how Max felt at this point. And this is why he went totally ballistic. When he was told eventually, yes, you've got to give the position back to George, he just hung, I shouldn't be laughing. He hung back coming out of turn 4, let George pass, and then tried to T-bone George out of the race. I think in Max's mind, I'm only trying to think what he was thinking. He was thinking, well, Charles nearly took me out at 330. If I was in the wrong with George going into turn 1, we're talking about something at, 50, 60 miles an hour. They're taking no action on the Charles thing. And I've got to give the position back to George for what happened at 50, 60 miles an hour. What is going on in this world? And of course, all the holier than thous and all the cynics are already saying out there, Max should be banned. Max is typical Max Verstappen. This is why he's never going to. To me, it was just the flip side of everything he'd done that afternoon, just being thrown back in his face. And the real culprit, ultimately, was Red Bull themselves, the team. I cannot, even as I speak, I'm absolutely stupefied that they made that call to bring him in. Why didn't they leave him out? He's on a used set of softs. Yeah, probably Oscar Piastri would have got him in, but the DRS didn't come into play until the last 3 laps. Possibly Oscar would have got him. I don't think Lando would have got him. I think he would have been second. He might have been third at worst, but he for sure would have beaten Charles Leclerc and George Russell. So what were Red Bull thinking? I just have no idea. Completely lost by strategy. And if you want a full stop at the end of that sentence, think about this. Jonathan Wheatley, one of the key people of Red Bull Racing who've kept that team what it is over the years, responsible in many ways for all the great calls that have been made in the pit lane, on the pit wall, the way they've worked in the garage, the number of record pit stops they've had at Red Bull. Jonathan Wheatley should take a lot of credit for that. Jonathan Wheatley now at Sauber, he decided to leave Red Bull 2/3 of the way through last year. He's now well entrenched at Sauber, Audi next year. Guess what? His driver, Nico Hülkenberg, finished 5th. This is the team, I got to say, in an aside, that I thought Carlos Sainz should be going to, but no, he went to Williams and had a dismal day yet again. Got to say that. Anyway, that to one side. Jonathan Wheatley doing at Sauber what he was doing at Red Bull just imploding. I mean, what a ridiculous call. I don't know how many times I'm going to say it in this video, but I cannot believe they made that call after all the hard work that had been done in that race, not only by Max, but it was a very good call, I think, to put him onto a new set of softs at the first pit stop. I think it confused everybody, McLaren particularly. And of course it did work, because he almost came out in front of Lando Norris when it all neutralized back into how they were going to race towards the finish. He was almost in front. And for a couple of laps, he was within a second of Lando when the traffic got involved. But no, he was going to be third, a very good third, much closer than Ferrari or Mercedes could even have dreamt about. But then the safety car came out, and then it changed everything. And then Red Bull took it upon themselves to tell Max to give the position back to George. They didn't even wait for the steward's decision on that. I think if Jonathan Wheatley was still at Red Bull, I cannot imagine in a million years that that call would have been put out on the radio to Max to do that. It's one of these small things on which hinge an entirely new story. 10-second penalty, of course, that's a massive penalty when you're given to a closely bunched field, as it was, because of the safety car. 10 seconds drops you from what? From the lead to last, it could be. It was a fairly blatant thing by Max, and of course that'll be replayed and replayed and replayed. And George used it to his maximum. I feel the car is damaged, this and that. Mind you, George, at the start of the race, made he made a very good start. As I said, he was triumvirate going into turn one. But then he sort of backed off and got passed by 2 or 3. He got passed by Lewis Hamilton, actually. Nice pass by Lewis. So it was a difficult first phase of the race. And for the first couple of laps, he was complaining about other drivers, Lewis and particularly, I guess, moving under braking and things going on. To which Toto Wolff quite correctly got on the radio and said, George, just concentrate. The car was obviously not very good on full tanks, but George drove well, as he always would. But yeah, getting on to Ferrari now, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, no excuse now really in terms of tyres. They both started on used softs, and quite early on, Charles clearly was quicker than Lewis Hamilton, shorter corners, just doing everything more neatly. Lewis sort of just looking clumsy in the car, and Charles got him. And then shortly afterwards, they brought Lewis in. This is at the beginning of the race, and put him onto a new set of mediums. And Lewis said, "Well, why have I been brought in so early?" And it wasn't that early, but I think that was Lewis basically saying, the only reason Charles Leclerc passed me is because I was looking after the tyres. I wanted them to do a really long first stint. I thought that's what we planned to do. And now you brought me in early and it's kind of ruined my race. I think that's what the translation was of what Lewis was trying to say. So again, question marks at Ferrari about why isn't everybody on the same page? It just seems incredible to me that the drivers like Lewis can constantly be asking questions about why he's coming early or this and that. Surely they're talking about that before the race, all these different contingencies. What happens if Charles is quicker than me and I have to let him pass? Should I then come in for tyres, or should I try and extend the stint? Not difficult to have those conversations. I suppose Lewis never wants to think about Charles being quicker than he is on the same tyres. I guess it comes down to that. So anyway, let's have a look at the final results. Fairly breathless video, this one, because those two sides of Max were just astonishing, really. And I think this race will be, sadly, I think this race will be remembered for all that stuff that happened with 6 laps to go before the checkered flag. And very few people will talk about what Max was doing in the early stage of the race, or how well Oscar Piastri drove in control of the race and blew Lando away, or some other good drives. I think it'll all be remembered for Max and his red mist, which is sad because there's a lot more going on. If nothing else, this race should be remembered for his car control coming out of 14 on those cold, hard tyres when the back end snapped out. And you've seen so many drivers overcorrect there, and you have a moment, and you can actually have a big shunt on the inside into the pit wall. And we've seen that many times. Indeed, that's one of the reasons they made turn 14 a chicane, because that had been happening so much. But Max, just fabulous car control. We don't often see that, so those reflexes from Max, but there they were on display. So Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, 1-2 for McLaren. Congratulations to them. And the weekend when the FIA was supposed to be restoring parity and taking all the flexi-wing elements out of Formula One and thus making it much more competitive again, and McLaren would be back there with Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari, well, none of that happened. They're the only team that made no changes to their car whatsoever, and they still blitzed the opposition, finished 1-2, very good. Charles Leclerc, P3, after a disappointing qualifying. Still no explanation as to why he didn't do his one and only Q3 lap at the end of the session rather than at the first, but we'll put that to one side. He did go into the race with 2 sets of new mediums, and that stood him in good stead. George Russell, P4. Max would have been P5, an incredibly disgruntled, annoyed P5, but instead he was an incredibly disgruntled P10. So then Nico Hülkenberg finished 5th in the Jonathan Wheatley run car. The only driver that I can see who actually ran new tyres on every stint. Partly because he didn't get to use too many where they qualified, but nonetheless, he was right on it, on a new set of softs at the end, beat Lewis Hamilton. So, yeah, impressive. Sauber beat Ferrari around Barcelona. Nico Hülkenberg beat Lewis Hamilton. Isaac Hadjar, another great result for him in the Racing Bulls behind Lewis. Another one. This guy just gets better and better. Head and shoulders above Liam Lawson yet again, who had lots of incidents in traffic. Pierre Gasly, who I think still overperformed in the Alpine Renault, finished ahead of Fernando Alonso, who didn't seem to have any new tyres at all, the other end of extreme, and went round and round in the Aston Martin. Did some good passes too, and finished 9th. Max Verstappen eventually classified 10th. Liam Lawson out of the points, 11th. Bortoleto did well, finished 12th. Yuki Tsunoda sort of made a little bit of ground, P13, and Carlos Sainz nowhere, sadly. So yeah, very, very disappointing day for Carlos Sainz. As I say, should have been in the Jonathan Wheatley car. Anyway, too late to say that now. So there we are. I suppose in some ways we can say an amazingly human race, because on the one hand, as I say, we saw Max Verstappen at his versatile, brilliant best in a difficult car. Various stages of the race, he was talking about the gear shift, the upshift being slow. This is a problem Red Bull seem to have had for a long time now at various stages of the weekend. And in addition, of course, when he was on the used softs, very quickly they went off and he wasn't able to do much with the turn into the car, turning in on the brakes, something he does incredibly well. Wasn't able to do that at all on the slow corners, which is why he was always so slow in Sector 2. But when he had reasonable grip because of the downforce, he was really quick. Unbelievably quick, really, in that car, that RB21 in Sectors 1 and 3. But then it all changed, I must say. We saw you toss of the coin there. That was tails. Now we go to heads, and it's Max Verstappen with the red mist. Absolutely ropeable, as probably some of the Australian supporters of Oscar Piastri would say. I think a lot of snickering up and down the pit lane as well when Max was doing all that and he got his penalty. And I think that's fairly typical of Formula One as well. Everybody likes to band together, and the basic consensus is that Max Verstappen's a madman, or whatever they want to say. And I don't think anybody really has a rounded view of what racing drivers are all about. I've known plenty of racing drivers lose their cool over things like that. Indeed, if racing drivers don't lose their cool over things like that, you could say shouldn't really be in the job. This isn't a gentleman's sport in the sense that they're all professional Formula One drivers. Well, it is. There's a lot of professional Formula One drivers out there. There's a lot of drivers that love posing for the crowd and the beautiful people on either arm. There's lots of drivers who go in for that. But Max isn't that. He definitely isn't that. He is, above all, just a racing driver. And what we saw was the soft underbelly of the racing driver today. So I would say don't give him too hard a time. He's got his penalty, and celebrate what he actually did in the race car when he was on the right set of tyres before Red Bull messed it all up with probably the most ridiculous strategy call in the history of ridiculous strategy calls. I wonder who did make that call. I mean, they've got a strategy department, haven't they? A well-known, famous strategy department. But I can't believe that something that important would have been left just to the strategy people. Surely the race engineering team would have overseen that. Surely whoever is doing Jonathan Wheatley's job, if there is anybody doing Jonathan Wheatley's job, would have got on top of that and said, no, leave him out. What are you guys talking about? Maybe nobody is at Red Bull anymore who can play that role. I don't know. If nothing else, Christian Horner should be doing that. If they haven't replaced Jonathan's brain with somebody with that sort of feel. So anyway, there we are. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and of course to REC Watches. If you go to the description below this video, you'll see the link to REC. Great company, run out of Copenhagen in Denmark. Swiss-made watches, but the creativity and the design all done in Denmark. And we've talked a lot about them, but just a reminder that they are a company steeped in motor racing heritage, whether it be Formula One, GT racing, sports cars, whatever it is, these guys are into it. And right now you can order one of the limited edition Lotus 98T Renault Turbo watches, which uses actual aluminium reforged in the tachymeter of the watch from that actual car. So I think it's a great thing. I don't know how many of you have cars that have meant a lot to you, just cars that you personally owned. But I love the idea of a little piece of that car being reforged into a watch and keeping it on your wrist all the time. What a lovely thing. And many other watches too, from other disciplines in racing and from other race teams and other great cars. Anyway, big thanks to them. Big thanks to you, the viewer, for watching. We'll be back with some live streams pretty soon, although I am off early next week to Sardinia for the Rally Italia Sardinia. Looking forward to that very much, but I'll be talking to Cameron tomorrow as we look back on the Monday morning at this tumultuous, is that the right word? Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona.